All right, perfect. And the recording has started, so just gonna jump right into it. Welcome everybody who is here and joining us today for scaling your product. As you can see on screen, we have our wonderful panelists with us already. I'll be providing a quick intro to them shortly. And if you're seeing yourself along with the panelists, not to worry. Uh, Nobody else is seeing you. That's just how WebEx is displayed. So you don't have to worry about being on screen with the panelists and everybody else looking at you. So jumping right into it to kick us off, we acknowledge the lands which constitute the present-day city of Mississauga as being part of the treaty lands and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Seneca and Attawandaron and Water Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat First Nation. We recognize these peoples, the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwa, nations within the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and all other peoples who inhabited these lands since time immemorial. The city of Mississauga is home to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And as a municipality, the city of Mississauga is actively working towards reconciliation by continuing to strengthen our relationship with Indigenous communities. We formally recognize the Anishinaabe origins of our name and continue to make Mississauga a safe space for all Indigenous peoples. The agenda for today, I'm going to introduce a little bit about the Mississauga Business Entrepreneur Center, or MBEC for short, a quick introduction to our Scale Up series, which we are currently in our 7th session out of 8. Time has flown by, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Scale Up series, what has happened, and what's the plan for um, the series moving forward. And then I'll introduce our speakers who you already see on camera. And then we're going to jump into a panel discussion and also jump into any questions that you have as attendees. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the chat and make sure you submit them to all panelists. And I will be reading out your questions later on in the session. So about MBEC, Mississauga Business Entrepreneur Center, or MBEC for short. We are part of the Economic Development Office here at the City of Mississauga. We are your central source for small business information, resources, and guidance. And we're currently providing support and services remotely because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our hours are Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We offer things like free business information and guidance, webinars and workshops like this one, other resources and tools, training and mentorship programs, and entrepreneurship programs. So entrepreneurship programs include things like our Starter Company Plus program, Summer Company program, the Digital Main Street program, and of course, none other than the Scale Up program pilot that we're currently running, that this session is currently part of. So if you want to learn more about what we do at MBEC, go to mississauga.ca/MBEC. And the training, webinars, and workshops, you can see what's coming up at this URL currently on screen. And you can also look back at our past webinars and workshop recordings. So as mentioned, this current session is the 7th out of our 8 sessions. You can go back to see the previous 6 webinars that we've had as part of the Scale Up series by visiting this link and navigating to the past webinar and workshop recordings section. So feel free to check out what we have coming up and also what we had already been through in terms of our sessions if you want to reference any of the materials and go back and review the conversations that we've had with all of our wonderful panelists. And we are here to help. If you have any questions about your venture, about your business, feel free to reach out to any of us. We have a very strong team to answer your question, any questions that you have. And here are just 3 examples of our team members who are here to help you, including myself, John Lam, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Specialist. Susan Lovelace is our small business consultant. And Laura Dunkley is our digital marketing consultant. So feel free to reach out to any of us with any specific questions that you have. And of course, check us out on social media. You can email our general email, give us a call, and of course, check out our website as previously mentioned. If you're on social media, feel free to reach out to us at Mississauga EDO through any of the 4 platforms that you see with the icons on screen, which include Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And now, this scale up series that I've been talking about intermittently in this intro. This scale up series is part of a series of 8 learning sessions. This is currently our 7th. And after the 8 learning sessions, things are capped off by mentorship, pitch practice, and pitching opportunity in 2022. It's this series and this program pilot is designed to help innovative companies using Industry 4.0 practices. If you are a scaling company with 100K to 2 million in revenue, or if you have patents or you have patent pending status, or if you've raised pre-seed or seed capital, this is the program for you. The program is especially meant to support innovative companies founded or led by individuals from underrepresented companies or communities, sorry. And as mentioned, you'll receive these 8 learning sessions. We are currently in December 2nd, scaling your product, and the recordings for the previous sessions will be up shortly. So please do visit the training webinars and workshops link as previously mentioned. And the January and February sessions are invite only. If you think you could benefit from them, if you think you fit into the scale up definition, or if you're doing anything within Industry 4.0 practices, please feel free to reach out. Would love to have a conversation with you. Okay, so what we're here for today, our speakers, Ehsan Mirdamadi is CEO of New Binary Inc. He is a serial entrepreneur with focus around tech companies with strong intellectual property at their core. He has built and exited multiple tech companies since 1999 and in cloud computing, computer networks, and software areas. He is now the CEO of New Binary Inc., which is a fractional CTO firm. More information on that to come while I introduce Vigen. Ehsan is also an active angel investor. So welcome, Ehsan. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And over to Vigen Nazarian, who is the president of New Binary. So Vigen works with Ehsan. And a little bit more about New Binary. It's a full-service venture and product development company providing advisory services and advisory services to early-stage startups, SMEs, and educational institutions. Vigen is also a serial entrepreneur and co-founder in 3 companies which had successful exits. Vigen is also our entrepreneur in residence, so if you'd like to chat with Vigen, please feel free to reach out to me directly for an introduction. Welcome, Vigen. And last but not least, Dr. Carolyn Moorlag is the Director of Center for Advanced Manufacturing and Design Technologies, CAMDIT for short, which is at Sheridan College. Dr. Moorlag has been conducting industrial research, overseeing project delivery, and initiating and driving collaborative projects for the past 15 years. She served as Senior Research and Development Manager of the Materials Integration and Intelligent Devices Lab at the Xerox Research Center of Canada, and also has a PhD in Materials Chemistry from the University of British Columbia. So welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to stop sharing now and hand it over to our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves, introduce your organization, and also why you think this topic of scaling your product is so important for us to talk about today. So I'll start with Ehsan. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Again, appreciate holding this event and having me here. As John mentioned, I consider myself a serial entrepreneur back in '99. The very same year, actually, that I started studying computer science at York University, I started my very first company. and that was a cloud computing company, and we were offering this very much like the same type of services that the Amazon and the Microsoft and the Google of the world were offering. So I was fortunate enough to be able to grow the company in a span of about 14 years, and eventually exited from that company. And very much like a lot of other fellow Canadian entrepreneurs in our ecosystem, I really wanted to understand how our fellow Americans are building these great and hyper scalable companies in Silicon Valley. So I moved there and wanted to learn and have the experience firsthand. And so I set up another company there. I co-founded a company with a few scholars at Stanford in the DNA sequencing space. And if you may be asking, what's the relationship between DNA sequencing and computer science? The answer is that the moment you have the DNA sequence data, everything from that point on is actually computer science, sorting through the data, interpreting and making sense out of that data. So learn the whole game of starting with an idea, creating the prototype MVP, earliest stage validation and traction, raising some capital, and and pushing through the major milestones of any life science company as we're essentially categorized as one, and going through many steps of building a company, Silicon Valley style, or I would say hyper scalable approach. So came back after having a little bit of a small exit, I have to say, and that's spending about 3 years there. Came back to Toronto and started sharing the knowledge and experience with our fellow Canadian entrepreneurs in and around incubators and accelerators of mostly Southern Ontario University, so York, Ryerson, U of D, Waterloo, and McMaster. So throughout those years, I identified that we have actually built so many fascinating, great earliest stage startups. But when it comes to scaling them and when it comes to taking them to the global markets, that's where we are having some knowledge gap. So we created New Binary to be just that entity to fill up that gap, not only for entrepreneurial or entrepreneurship activities through New Binary Ventures, and also through the scalability, tech scalability perspective, which is the seniority in the tech leadership and the CTO work. And we essentially help companies to start off with ideas, validate earliest stage with just a small iteration or first version of the product, which we call MVP, and then grow it over time and based on the customer feedbacks, based on the market demand, and based on the direction that actually market dictates back to the companies. So that's where we are today, and we are fortunate to be part of this fascinating era of our, I guess, innovation economy. And I'm thankful to be invited as one of the hosts, as one of the panelists here.
Well, thank you for being here. Through your journey of kind of starting off with computer science in the late 90s, you've seen how things have changed in terms of product, in terms of computer science, and all the relevant other industries that it touches. So we're super happy to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Over to Vigen, intro about yourself, your organization, if you have anything else to add about New Binary, and also why you think this topic of scaling your product is important. You're on mute.
I always make fun of people who are on mute. So it happened to me now. The first one in the day. So thank you very much, John, and thank you for our co-panelists. I'm really excited to be on this panel and explore the topic. So my name is Vigen Nazarian. I am the president of New Binary Ventures, which is a venture development company and sister partner of New Binary. We create companies. We help entrepreneurs create companies, and we help companies that are on their journey to value creation become investable. We focus on bringing corporate partners and young, enthusiastic entrepreneurs with their great ideas to a place that they can build value, something meaningful that is scalable and investable. As for myself, I started a long time ago in the science world. I came out of U of T, both my undergrad and grad was at U of T. I'm a medical geneticist by background. I joined industry after school for about 11 years, and through various acquisitions, I came out of DuPont. My focus during the industry was research and finding new product ideas, which was a great way to push myself into the business of science. Then I got into the business of science, and I helped universities start up companies, license technologies. And after a few years, I ventured into building my own companies. I should add or update my bio that I have a total of 4 companies that I participated as a co-founder. I'm happy to say 2 of them became public companies, and I will never do that again. But overall, the journey's been incredible. The experience been incredible. I've seen amazing people. And as I said, these days, with my partner in crime, my son, we're trying to contribute to Canadian innovation ecosystem. And that's something we are engaged with from coast to coast. So this is something that not only as far as business for us is important, but we also want to contribute to the betterment of our companies with great talents that we have. The topic is very important for me because I find quite often many companies at early stage don't plan for their growth and scalability. And this becomes one of the major gaps in their investability. And the reason for that is they're not able to generate the type of revenue that investors like to see. So product scalability is very important. You can look at it from different perspectives. You can look at it from a technical perspective if you are in the digital world. But I know on our panel or in our audiences, we have people from the food industry. Scalability is also very important for the food industry. And I'm happy to talk about some of the blind spots that entrepreneurs, when they start businesses around food products or household items even, it's important to have that mindset in mind that at some point your product is going to go much bigger, and do you have the ability to scale accordingly? So that's why the topic is very interesting for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important for any type of company, and interesting that you brought up the food example, because even more so because of all the regulations, especially here in Canada, right? So yeah, absolutely such a great example to talk about in terms of navigating what scalability would look like and how you have to be mindful of that from the outset. Thank you so much again for being here. Dylan, over to you. About you, your organization, and why scaling your product is an important topic.
Great. Thank you, John. So my name is Carolyn Morlag, and my original background is in materials science. I have a master's in engineering and a PhD in science. And I really entered the industry working in materials science. As John said, I was there in industry for 15 years. I was developing materials solutions for products. And then I moved into developing materials for 3D printing, as well as 3D printing and integration for prototyping. So I'm currently, I moved into this role this year. I'm currently the director of CAMDET at Sheridan College in Brampton, which is a research center for advanced manufacturing and design technologies. So I'll talk a little bit about CAMDET. as a center, it's not, I would say it's not market focused, but it's technically focused on helping to make, you know, a new concept feasible and functional through engineering tools. And the research that's carried out at CAMDET is applied research. So it's carried out with industry partners. We're positioned to carry out projects demonstrating technical viability. We can aid in projects to create the prototype that, for example, a startup may need to take them to the next stage of development. You know, that you might need to convince investors of the utility of the product at an early stage. And for companies that are further along, we can help demonstrate efficiency and scalability, which is, of course, the focus of this panel. The advantages of Sheridan College is that there is a lot of industrial experience within the college. The professors and staff usually come from industry, so they're familiar with solving industry challenges and understanding how to conduct industry research to develop a new product or take the product to the next level. So the engagement and initiation of an industry project can be pretty fast and productive. And I think it's important to be discussing this. When you're developing a new product, it is important for the product to be scalable technically. So what the process that might work at a small scale, or even the sourcing of raw materials or manual assembly, it may be just entirely impractical at a large scale. And you know, the lack of viability can be technical or it can be due to cost, and the two are often related. So, you know, for example, processes need to be efficient to be viable, and they also need to be safe. And if they're not safe, they're not cost effective. So it's all linked together. And what works in a, you know, in a lab may be out of the question in a production environment. So I really think it's, you know, it's about having those early discussions and early planning about scaling and where you want your business to go and you know how big you want your product to be. So yeah, I'm looking forward to more discussions on this topic during the panel.
Amazing, thank you, Carolyn. And you know, just to provide a bit of a sneak peek, we're actually, you know, working with CAMDET with Carolyn to offer some support for applied research projects, so that if you are in this stage of looking to scale up your product and could benefit from CAMDET's services, we might be able to provide some support on that front. So more news to come for that. Nothing too official to share just yet, but just a bit of a sneak peek, a bit of a teaser for anybody who might be interested in working with CAMDET. All right, so thank you again for being here. I'm going to jump into the questions. The attendees, if you're here and you have any questions, please feel free to submit those via the chat and send them off to all panelists, and I'll read them. If it's something that's relevant to the conversation that we're currently having, and I'll read them right away. If not, then we'll have a Q&A period afterwards, and I'll read out your questions. So please feel free to use the chat to submit those. Okay, so question for all of you. What does it look like when a company's product isn't scaled? You know, we talk about how important it is to think about it, but what does it actually look like? You know, for somebody who hasn't been through it, they might believe that, you know, their processes, whether it's manual manufacturing, putting something together, or another process. For you, what are those indicators? The difference between a product that isn't scaled versus a product that is and can actually grow in the market that they're looking to grow in. Perhaps I'll hand it off to Carolyn to kick us off.
Okay. I mean, I certainly have examples from my previous experience. For example, like even though I worked for a large company, we had one process, which was a benchtop process to make a specialized ink, and that process, it was an expensive product, but that process was extremely difficult to scale. So the issue when you're in this situation is you have a great product, You know, you can charge a high price for it, but when you receive a large order, if somebody wants to use your ink, in this case, in their product, if you're not able to scale it up, if you're not able to do it at large scale, then you're, you know, not only is your cost point stay high, which limits how much you can sell, but you also are just not able to deliver. And, you know, this is really limiting you from growing and moving into different areas. So, I mean, it's that inability to fulfill large orders and also do it in a cost-effective way where you can be competitive. Maybe your product will be the only one for a while and you can charge that high price, but eventually it becomes commoditized in some way. There's going to be competitors and you really need to bring that cost down. So I don't know, it's extremely limiting, I would say.
Yeah, so there's this element. If you have done your customer research correctly, you have a niche that you can address, but that only lasts, that competitive advantage of addressing that tiny niche only lasts for so long, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that's not going to last forever, and you want to move into the market and have that advantage of you know, being the first one and establishing your market, but you need to grow to be able to do that.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's a bit of a competition with time.
Yeah. Hassan, what's your take? Any examples?
Oh, yes. So when it comes to software, for example, scalability could be the number of users, the amount of, let's say, web traffic or mobile traffic that passes through your cloud infrastructure. And so in majority of the cases that we actually as a company are dealing with these days is that there's, you know, the co-founders, the inventors do an excellent job in creating, in coming up with ideas, you know, coming up and understanding some problems or gaps in the market and prototyping and validating the earliest stage or the early versions of their prototype. But when it comes to scaling, everything starts to change when it comes to software, for example. So your cost of infrastructure starts to change drastically. Your even your architectural considerations for the software starts to change and starts to shift. And how people interact with your system, with your application, starts to change. Like, for example, we technologists typically become too fancy with technology. We want to just build all the features on the interface and get people to start using them. But when you are thinking about a scalable software product, you essentially focus on what the majority of your users or the target market users are going to be using. So you may start even, you know, maybe shelling off some of the features that you thought that people would be using, and you try to make it simplified. And you probably have seen, and quite often we see that you know, next iterations of some of the software usually have a much simpler interface because they want you to focus on the main and the core functionalities of the offering, and then they start hiding it in, you know, settings or other pages or advanced settings. And so that's what we see out there in terms of the scalability for the software. And to Carolyn's point, the whole business feasibility or viability can start to, you know, to shift. Because if you're not considering for those scalability considerations, for example, for your cloud costs as, you know, essentially per user costs for your infrastructure, for maintenance, for growing it can change drastically. And so we typically suggest that the co-founders think about the target market that they're going after first. Think about the number of users that would be potentially using the platform early on, and go through an exercise practice testing of how it's going to start looking like. So the scalability is different for different people. And to just give you an example, one of the, again, repeating stories that we see out there is that some of the technologists, inventors, come to us and say, this is the amazing software that we've built, and we built it on technology stack 1 or 2. And reason of it is that we think in a couple of years, millions of users are going to be using that platform, where in reality, only a few thousand, maybe for the first few years. But the whole technology build, consideration, maintenance, everything starts to shift from that point on, and it can actually change everything for the business.
So it's really interesting that you said that the focus. It sounds like perhaps the ones that aren't scaled haven't considered the actual problem that they're solving, and they're just trying to throw in all types of technology and just perhaps it's doing too much. It sounds like that's a key indicator that the founders haven't actually scaled their product according to the feedback from the customers and what they know about their target customer. Would you say that's an accurate assessment, Hassan?
Well, it's very relevant to the type of users and to the size of the user base that you're targeting. Like, for example, and you don't have to be scalable. That's one of the things that I want to establish here in this conversation, is that when you're building platforms, maybe you don't have to be that much scalable. So to just give you a very, again, concrete example on this one, is that if you do have a financial analysis platform and you want to plug it into accounting software that potentially has probably billions of users, that's entirely different when you plug it into, let's say, VC portfolio management, or venture capital or investment firm portfolio management software, because they're only a few thousand. But if you're going after the generic accounting software space, that's entirely different. So think about what you want to achieve first, and then worry about the scalability.
Gotcha. One step at a time. So again, we've had examples, on ink. We've had examples on software. Do you have any other examples, perhaps from your days in life science as a geneticist, from the early days? Do you have any other examples to add?
So I want to talk about two examples, and now that you brought up, from my early days, I have to go to my archives and think about. But one that comes to my mind was a diagnostic methodology that was extremely complex and required very sophisticated techs to be able to use the technology. That methodology, which was the foundation of the business for detecting something very minute in blood, was not scalable because you couldn't find that type of expertise in every lab to be able to utilize the methodology. So consequently, the business folded. As simple as it was. It's interesting when you're designing something. Yes, it's sophisticated. Yes, it can do what it can, but you couldn't find the talent, the type of talent that you needed in order to execute the diagnostic procedure. It was not scalable. Now, the business folded. That was in the early days, and maybe what could have or what should have been done was to create a centralized service in order to scale it in that sense, where you can have 2-3 experts work from the same location but provide a service to the external customers. So that's one example of something that is a diagnostic base and from my early days. There's also, I want to talk about scalability in terms of customers that are going to use your product. So yes, there are technical issues that you have to think about your methodology or your software or some kind of an ingredient, but sometimes you have to make sure what you're designing is scalable to all types of customers, not one type of customer. And that brings me to an example of a company that they had a product that you had to scan a QR code in order to get the type of information that people needed in order to purchase the product. The young digital savvy knew how to use their smartphone. But if you're putting that service at a in a Staples store next to an accounting software, most likely your users are going to be older people. So they found out that there's no uptake or conversion or clients coming from the older side of the market simply because they didn't know even how to use a QR code reader. Now, things have changed, and nowadays pretty much everybody knows how to read a QR code. But you need to be mindful, is your business scalable to all types of users, types of customers that you are going and hoping that you can create some market and generate revenue?
Yeah, so there are key components. There's the product, there's the customer, and you also alluded to the team, the recruitment of the talent, because if you don't have the people to do the thing and create the product and to connect with the customers, then ultimately it's not going to lead anywhere. So you kind of need all three of those components.
I give you another good example. If you open up a restaurant and you have a 5-star chef, customers come to that restaurant. But if you want to franchise the business, you need to figure out how to develop recipes that in the hand of another chef, they can replicate it with the same finesse and same sort of dedication they show to creating their art in the food that they prepare. So that's why it's, when you go to 5-star restaurant, it's expensive because the model is not scalable.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's not scalable, so it can't reach a mass market, and therefore they have to charge a higher price.
Exactly.
However, in that market, there are people who are willing to purchase. So very interesting points that you make here, Begin. And Carol, I want to turn it over to you because there's a attendee submitted question about, as a non-tech founder, how can we validate if a concept we have for a web software is doable? And sometimes, non-tech creatives, their imagination goes beyond what might be actually possible. Say, for example, in artificial intelligence or machine learning. I know I did. I mean, my second business, I was trying to create a chatbot for mental health, connecting people to mental health resources. And that technology wasn't there to really understand the sentiment behind what users would say, and the data set wasn't there for me to actually train that bot. So I'm a very good example for this question. And at Camdit, you helped to put the research team together for the industry partners, for the companies. Can you talk a little bit about what it might look like for perhaps an earlier stage company who might not have as much expertise as the research team that you put together, and what is the result after the project?
Okay. Yeah, so addressing this question, there are a couple ways of going about it. If you're at a really early stage, you're probably too early to really do a research project in order to get the funding that's available and do a demonstration. But it would almost seem like it would be good to try to find an expert and bring them on board. I mean, a lot of the expertise that we pull from at Sheridan, from the different schools, like say in the Faculty of Applied Science and Technology, they will get involved with startups and give some technical advice. And that might be a good way, at least initially, to understand if you talk to somebody who has experience in industry, who's a technical expert in that area, they're probably going to very quickly be able to at least give you a sense of how doable it is. I'm just saying that because people sometimes come to us and want to do a research project around it, but it might just be a discussion, at least initially, that they need to have, and potentially pivot your direction if maybe it's not doable for exactly what you thought, but it could be in another area. So, but if you're at a later stage and you've developed your concept, you've had input from different expertise, and it's a matter of bringing it to life, then that's a possibility for at CamDet for a research project. Yeah, and I'm not a software expert, so I'd say the other two panelists should probably give some input on this.
Again, you had your finger up?
Yeah, you know what? I think it's very important that in the early days when you're having this conversation about your product and your scalability, to take into consideration the technical and the business component of the product. So this is something that Ehsan and I continuously at No Binary face. We have people who have created something, but the technical, very heavy on the technical side, but the product and product fit to the market and the business model is extremely important. So you need to look at your product and scalability more holistically, looking at all the aspects of your operations, your business, to be able to meet the market need and be scalable when the time comes, without wasting resources. And as I said, at New Binary, this is something we always look and see often. The blind side for most entrepreneurs is they're very focused on mostly technical, how something works, but looking down the road in the horizon, the future, you need to take into consideration many things, including business. I think Ehsan can probably elaborate on that because it's a common pain point for us.
Of course. I have a couple of main, and I agree with everything that our fellow panelists mentioned. I want to put some pointers there in the minds of our, founders, inventors. One is that when you are wearing the hat of a startup co-founder, don't be shy asking questions, even from your potential competitors. Just go to them and say, I have this idea. I want to work on this. And what do you think? What kind of challenges did you face? And really the best type of companies, and that's the culture that I'm seeing, and I hope that continues this way in our ecosystem, is that we share knowledge, because it's not about trade secrets. It's not about, how I'm going after a certain market or kind of an intellectual property that I developed. It's about the journey. It's about the challenges. It's about what not to do, usually, for the most part. And so I would encourage everyone that see this challenge, this question, as part of their business due diligence analysis, business plan writing exercise. So go out there, ask the question from, let's say, target for about 20 people, from technologists to business owners to entrepreneurs to potential buyers to potential industry partners. Ask that question, and you would get some level of clarity. Second item is that your first wave of contacts that you should be talking to, shouldn't be, let's say in this case, software developers, because software developers ask you about your requirements and they're going to tell you this is how you're going to build it. They're not going to tell you how to turn that into a business, how, and what the challenges are to create a product out of it, and how to scale it, and how to position it better, refine it, and over time for the market that you're chasing. They are probably the last, on the list. And the other thing is that, I think this still means that the company is in research stage, because knowing if a certain technology can be applied to certain challenge, that's essentially what we call a research stage. So I would say even working with academia and institutions like Cambridge would go a long way, and not trying to be salesy or do any salesmanship here. But that's exactly the reason we created this company, New Binary, because there is nothing like it out there as far as we know. So come and talk to companies like ours, and have that conversation. And by the way, we do this as a practice, as a giving back to our community. We can do that analysis with you. We can sit down and go through the thinking process and tell you on the high level if it's even possible or not. So I would say do enough research.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to explore that a bit further and then come back to what New Binary does, in terms of fractional CTOs, because this is something that I just learned of in the past year. But I want to spend a bit of time on research and development. We often lump the two together, research and development, R&D, right? Scaling companies might have R&D departments, teams, product teams, right? Carolyn, with Camden focusing on applied research, when does research become product development? How do we differentiate the R from the D?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're doing product development, you have to have gotten to a certain stage. And it doesn't have to be like you'll have a prototype, but your prototype doesn't have to be perfect. It's certainly you don't want to wait until it is before you work towards thinking about scaling and thinking about developing that product. Really, you just want something that roughly works at the small scale, and the specifications are there. And when something's at that stage, we can take it towards development. And whether that's, if you have a system that requires electronics integration, and you have something that's integrated together, it functions, it demonstrates what it's supposed to demonstrate, then that's the stage where, for example, we could work on that integration, make it more product ready, so that it could be manufactured in the market. Try to work on the efficiency of it, and the materials costs. So you're working towards your minimum viable product at that stage. So that's how we see it. I mean, what came before that was more research. That was like, taking your idea and making some sort of prototype out of it, and then the development is beyond that. That's roughly how we see it.
Gotcha. Yeah, awesome. So it seems like there's a bit of a blurred line, right? And it's difficult, especially for a scaling company, especially for a founder or a business leader who hasn't been through it, to really understand, hey, I'm doing research and now it's development. It's not like a flip of a switch. So going back to, this idea of a fractional CTO, first of all, what is a fractional CTO, and how do fractional CTOs help companies who are perhaps in that development stage, who have experienced a bit of product market fit? How does a fractional CTO play a role in helping these companies go to the next level? And what do they do differently than, say, just a regular CTO who is part of the founding team?
Should I take the first stab at it, or okay? So, well, the best way to describe this is to create that contrast between, as we call it, lead developers or developers versus a CTO. So a lead developer is a person that you give the requirements, provide, let's say, the user flows, the personas, the feature sets that you want, and then they go back and do their own analysis, come back and tell you, this is how much it's going to cost, this is how much it's going to take. These type of expertise and tech stacks we need based on their analysis. And then obviously from that point on, the software development process starts. Whereas a CTO would even actually starts by just challenging those requirements. Why do you want to build these features? Why is it important to be built now? Who's your user? Who's your customer? How much are they willing to pay? How many users you anticipate to have in the first few years, and so on. And so based on that, then they go back on the drawing board and they say, these are the technology stacks that we should be building it upon, because these technology stacks allow us to get to the scale that we hope to get to. You can find developers for it. They are relatively reasonably, pricing their services. But for example, if you wanted to fix or write a software in a language that was predominantly used 20 years ago, there may be some developers out there you could find, but they would be extremely expensive because you can find a lot of resources, a lot of those talent resources out there. And so, and also the CTO also has to think about the business objectives. You need to go through this compliance process. These are the regulatory considerations. These are the things, these are the types of data that you can store or anonymize, and this is how you should be exposing that data to other types of users of the same platform. Like for example, for the health tech companies, you cannot allow for anyone to be able to find the actual identity of the patient. So what kind of a data is offered or provided to, let's say, a drug or pharmaceutical company that wants to make sense out of that data. So it's all important for a CTO to marry the business objectives of the company, of the initiative, to the technical requirements and the objectives, and then create this overarching and kind of a holistic approach, thinking about those things. I can bore you and tell you so many other things that the CTOs can do, but being considerate of the grants, all the things that the government support that may exist out there. How do you manage the roadmap of your software, of your application that aligns with those incentives? And and you essentially even plan the first early adopters, what kind of a measurable impact you want to extract from that experience, and how it goes back into the next iteration of the product development. So it's, again, a senior role that is the right hand of the CEOs, that's reports to the CEOs, and they talk both business and technical.
Again, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, just something simple. I remember once I read an article about the role of a CTO, and it was illustrated by the fact that if a product fails in the market, the first person you fire is your CTO. You don't go to your engineer or your code developer and say, you screwed up. Everything really relies on the vision of the CTO to understand the business, understand the requirements, understand the market information, vision of the CEO that comes, and execute that in a form of a product that is staged for the market that they want to go to. Now, you could be a small company and today thinking about 1,000 customers, and you're going to design your product around those requirements. And you're going to learn from that experience and then scale it to a level that now you can serve a much bigger population of customers. But ultimately, it's the CTO that brings the business consideration, technical know-how, and possibilities in order to put it in a form of a product development plan and execute that. And through that process, I should also add, we think about things, codes, as part of the product, but the people part of it is very important. So it's one of the other roles that CTO plays is they know what talent is missing in order to implement the plan for the product.
Gotcha. So I think that really distinguishes an early stage tech startup from a more mature scaling company. The more mature companies understand that success comes through the interaction between the market and the product. Whereas really early stage, if they're in that research stage, they might be just focused on the functionality, the technology, and whether it solves that problem. And in this topic of scaling the product, it's more about how does it interact, right, with a larger market? How do we anticipate to move our product, to move whatever that we're doing internally to match what the market is going to look like at a bigger scale in a future time? And that CTO is so critical because they're supposed to understand both sides of that coin.
Yeah. May I just say one more thing, because as I mentioned to you, John, and apologies to my co-panelists, I have to leave at 11. But the nature of early stage companies often is based on founders that are technically oriented. And therefore, they don't have the business experience that they need in order to blend with the technical knowledge they have in order to come up with a product vision as how you need to build something with your available resources and tempered with what the market reality is at the stage you are. So this is the biggest blind spot for our entrepreneurs, that they often are technical founders and they don't have business experience. And it's so important to create a team that helps you, fill that gap. And going back to the role of the CTO, because things are more technical at the early stages, having a CTO in the team is a great idea, because they kind of doing what the business, arm needs to provide in terms of ideas and direction. So if you don't have that, at least try to get some mentors, some CTO mentors to help you with that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why we're pursuing this initiative with Camden to marry the technical side with the business support, so that we can provide that support to founders, regardless of whether they're coming from a technical background or a business background. So yeah, both sides of the coin are so important. I want to switch gears here to a pretty important topic in our day and age, and this is the environmental impact of producing a product